I realise I made a little bit of a mistake this evening by having a beer before this talk. So at certain points, I'm probably going to use my words really badly. You're all going to want to shout out hypocrite. But if we try and keep the pantomime to the end, that'd be really helpful for me. Can you guys hear us back? Okay. Yeah. Brilliant. So yes, I want to talk to you today about UX writing. Before I do that, I just want to kind of briefly introduce myself. I have been told I have to do a corporate pitch. Softwire, good company, fun. We've got a UX and design department now, that's exciting. We're based in Bristol and London. I'm more fun than just corporate pitches though. I like databases, I like hacking around. I'm swum with turtles on all social media worth mentioning. I have a background in statistics. And if anything is done wrong on the web and in UX, it is statistics every single time. Sometimes maliciously, sometimes just because people don't realise what they're doing. But one of the things that I particularly enjoy is the X Factor. I love the X Factor. The X Factor is one of my favourite TV shows. And it is not my favourite TV show because it's good. It's not my favourite TV show because the singing is particularly impressive or enjoyable. I just love the X Factor because it is so cynical and manipulative that you can't help but just laugh at it. And I want to talk about one case study from 2010. Wagner. Wagner was the Novelty Act from 2010, which essentially means that Simon Cowell kind of didn't like him. Simon Cowell was the person who wanted him out of a show. He provided fun, colourful, flamboyant performances whilst he was doing well, and he was making the X Factor hit the headlines because of Facebook groups to kind of cause him to win. But Simon Cowell didn't want him to win because he couldn't sing, to be honest. And because of that, they kept him on a very, very tight leash. And then the week that they wanted Wagner gone because he was starting to make a mockery of the competition, they made him sing the song, I'm a creep, I'm a weirdo, what the hell am I doing here, I don't belong here. And then Danny Minogue told him that he really connected with those lyrics. Suffice to say, that evening, Wagner was out of the competition. And it's exactly things like this that allow us to see the power of words. Simon Cowell knows how effective words can be. He has got a real motivation to make you believe certain things. This is a graph of where the money comes from off the back of reality TV shows like The X Factor. About maybe, 20 to 30 million pound in votes revenue, about 80 million pounds in advertising revenue, but about 300 million pound if an act goes to become the next successful singer like One Direction or Leona Lewis did. So Simon Cowell actually cares to manipulate the votes to win. And therefore, it pains me to say this, but as software developers and UX designers, we have to care a little bit about what Simon Cowell is doing. And that's Simon Cowell, grinning at you. You fools, you sheep. It's the iceberg secret. I don't know if you guys have heard the iceberg secret before. It's the idea that when you are using a website, you can only see 10% of the website. The top 10% of the iceberg is the thing that's floating above the water, and the bottom 90% is the bit under the water. And in exactly the same way as when we develop software, 90% of the software is behind the scenes. The user can't see it, but we're spending 90% of the time making our SQL queries more efficient or changing the way we run our recommendation algorithm. And the user doesn't care because they don't realise what's going on. So the points that I'm kind of raising today are entirely about how to manipulate your users into thinking that you've done really well. The aims are basically to just touch on 4 high-level themes, kind of why we're doing this, kind of what you can do to get better at this, how we can use conventions that other sites have used, and how to kind of pitch the tone of your application well. And then I want to kind of give some case studies and some brief insights as to how we can use this on a more day-to-day level at the end. So the first thing that I really wanted to tell you is to remember the point of why you're writing. There is genuinely a reason that you're writing words in your application. I know that we are software developers. I know that 90% of us here will probably have maths and stats degrees or computer science degrees. I know that we've been working in engineering for a long time, and so our idea of writing good words is trying to avoid comments where possible. But at the same time, we should be remembering that we are communicating with our user for a reason. In communication is the whole idea that we have got some information and we need to confer it to the person that's using our software. There are 3 parts to communication. I stole this, not stole the slide, I did the slide myself, it's pretty. I stole the concept from a communications presentation I went to a little while ago. But there's 3 parts to communication. There is one person who has got information, and they need to convey that information. There is a second person on the other side who wants to receive this information. But there's no magical box that we can put information in and send it away. If we did that, then communication wouldn't be a thing. So you need to have some manner of channel that you translate your information into to put in the channel. The ideas of channels are a presentation like this one, written communication, emails, phone, subconscious things like body language and everything like that. All of these are ways that you are communicating information. Sometimes not the information you want to convey, and there's we'll see examples of that later where you're losing the substance of your point because you've chosen a bad channel. But in some way, you have information, you want to give it to somebody else. I thought about this, actually. It stayed with me quite a lot, especially when it comes to UX, because with UX, it's about the user experience. It's about the experience of the user on the other side. So the channel is defined. It is your software, and it is the way that your software is being presented to the user. The user is locked in because you have to do something with the people who use your software. And so UX is essentially the idea that, given the constraints on the right-hand side, how can we still communicate the information with our user? What buttons and knobs do we have to push in order to get that information across as effectively as possible? And when we kind of think about UX writing, it's about maximizing the information transferred in the writing of our application. So when the user is seeing the screen on the other side, when they're seeing the words in the application, how are we communicating the information we have to them? So, as I said, you actually just have to remember, when you're writing your application, when you're writing words and sentences in your application, you have to remember the point of doing it in the first place. Because it's very easy to have all of these kind of high-flying ideas and all of these buzzwords when it comes to UX, which obfuscate the point of what you're doing. So I'm going to kind of begin this talk by reminding you that actually think about what you're doing. Sometimes I'm going to give you ideas, and they're clearly going to be wrong in your application. There's a famous, I think it's 1994, George Orwell. There's a famous George Orwell quote, which is, "Here are my rules for how to write good English, but sooner break them than do anything barbarous," because we have to be communicating at the end of the day. So just some key points to this. Don't lose sight of the information you want to give across. If what I'm saying is going to change the information or is not going to present the whole information to the user, then maybe you shouldn't use the techniques that I'm suggesting. There was a famous 90s pop band called the Sugar Babes. There were 3 of them to begin with, and then one left and got replaced, and then another one left and got replaced, and then a third one left and got replaced, and then a 4th one, and so on. And by the end of it, the Sugar Babes didn't have any of the original members, and they lost the heart and the soul of who they were. They really lost the very idea of being the Sugar Babes. Don't be the Sugar Babes. For many reasons. So the idea is that communicate the information in its purest form. Don't lose a nugget of information because you're rewriting and re-editing. Just be very clear that at the end, where you've got to is exactly where you want it to be. In our diagram, we had the 2 people and we had the channel. Make sure you're using the right channel. You're kind of listening to me talk about UX writing, so you might assume that I'm going to say, write everything, put all the words down that you can think of. But don't. Sometimes the writing is actually, by writing, you're losing the best way to communicate. Sometimes if you're writing a website, the business rules are so complex, it's easier just to put a phone number on the website and say, phone us up. Just chat us through with this. We can't be bothered to make a multi-million-pound web application to take a booking for a B&B in Cornwall. Sometimes that isn't the best way to do things, sometimes the phone number is. So always make sure that when you are writing in your web application, that's the best thing to do. And always remember your user at the other end. We've said that the user is locked in, and that's certainly true. You can't change who's using your software, but you can tailor the software towards them. So you're going to be thinking about questions like, are they technical? If you're displaying an error message to your user, should you be putting the technical details of the error message because you want to solve it? Do they understand the domain that you're dealing with? So if you are working with the BBC, say, making an internal web application for the BBC, then you can probably assume that all of the people that's going to see your web application know about the domain you're working with. They know about media because they're in media. But if you're making something, say, Google, then you might not be able to refer as explicitly as you would like to about details of the search engine industry because people don't know about search engines just because they use Google. And we have to think about these when we're writing our web applications. I've kind of started off this talk by saying sometimes it's not relevant. I'm going to go one step further and say you probably shouldn't be listening to me in the first place. No matter how much advice I give you, you are not going to be perfect. People don't get things right the first time. Very famous authors all say time and time again, you know, you just do not get things right. There's an editing process for a reason. Neil Gaiman, very famous kind of graphic novelist and sci-fi author, kind of talks about this, that you should always take advice from other people because you didn't get it right. Ernest Hemingway is a little bit more blunt about this. But the authors have acknowledged that there is an editing process. Speechwriters have acknowledged that they have to give a speech a couple of times before they present it to an audience as large as yourself. And to be fair, there is another industry that has recognised that we don't get things right the first time, and it's the coders. We know as an industry that people make mistakes. There are things in place to stop us from just committing our first attempt to the code base and hoping it just magically works. We've got peer review, we've got pair programming, we've got TDD. All of these are in place to make us actually realise that we're fallible in the first place. Now, it doesn't mean I don't like you. Like, I really like you guys. You've been laughing at my jokes. It's been a nice talk so far. I don't think you're bad people. But as Doctor Who once said, you humans have got such limited little minds. Because humans just make mistakes, they really do. And there's many reasons that we make mistakes, and we've got to factor them into our development process. Humans only have one point of view. You've got one mind. You can only see the world as you perceive it. There might be other users, and there might be other end users of your software that would just use it in different ways from you. So you're expecting them to just have your experience, and that isn't the case. Empathy will get you a long way in software development, but it won't let you cover every edge case. Some problems only present themselves as you're going through the application itself. So you might be writing an error message for something, but you don't realise that it's going to have to cover a case that you didn't realise when you wrote this error message very early on in your application. There might be different user journeys that could take you to the same error page, and so because of that, you may not have seen the error messages to begin with. And nobody catches every error anyway. Everybody just lets things slip through the gaps. Nobody's perfect. So the advice I'll give you, kind of here, is you just have to communicate more. You just have to write more. You just have to write more things and communicate and do this lots and lots of times. You have to write the same thing over and over again. Because each time you write it, you're going to get iteratively better at it. But the important thing when you are doing this, if you just write the same old rubbish every single time, then you're not going to get better at it. Your error messages won't get better. The text on your websites will not get more tailored to the people that you're dealing with, unless you get feedback. Feedback from yourself with a little bit of distance. Another Ernest Hemingway quote is, write drunk, edit sober. Because you just need to get things on a page, and then you need to go back and actually make sure that you've got the right things on the page. Get feedback from your colleagues, because they're going to see things from a slightly different perspective. And at the end of it, you need to get user acceptance testing. You need the users that are using your site to actually say, is this site usable? Because you're not the ones that can decide that. It's only your end users that can. So yes, this talk is futile. A lot of what I'm saying is rubbish. Because at the end of this talk, you will still go away and you will still make mistakes. Everybody still makes mistakes. But the idea is that this talk might be futile if you want to be perfect, but hopefully it will make you be a little bit more perfect. So if we're imperfect, if we always make mistakes, how can we guarantee that we make less mistakes than we might otherwise have done? And the answer is by shamelessly stealing the work of people who have done it before. If something works, use it. Take it, steal it. Web form. Oh, I loved filling in this web form. I had a really good experience filling in this form for this application, registering. Take it. Use all of their ideas. It's not stealing, I promise. I hope to prove to you it's not stealing. All of classic UX is stealing. The whole sector, the whole tech sector at the moment, is getting themselves into a massive frenzy, throwing money at each other, having patent lawsuits that occasionally go one way, occasionally go the other, and always get thrown out of court in the end. Because every operating system still has scroll bars, and every website still has drop-downs. And the icons on every button in every operating system are the same. This isn't fair. This is noticing that somebody is starting a convention and using it, making it more of a convention. Like the whole point of a convention is that it's a general agreement. Ignore the consent bit. It's a general agreement, accepted usage. especially as a standard procedure, because you're really genuinely furthering the cause of their website as well by doing it. It reinforces that the languages that you're referring to. So in e-commerce, like everywhere has a shop, everywhere has a basket, or everywhere has a cart or a trolley. And by using their language as well, you're not diminishing their website, you're building up a convention, and you're making sure that people are more familiar with it so that their site becomes more useful as well. By borrowing their terminology, you are genuinely reinforcing the industry as a whole, and they will probably not mind about that. To clarify, there is such a thing as stealing. If you go away and you think, oh, that banner's really good, or that name is really awesome, clearly that's wrong. And I'm not suggesting you do that. But there is a fine line between thinking, this is a very useful site that will further their business if I use it too, and I'm just going to copy and paste Microsoft's HTML. Thinking about it in terms of social media, thinking about it in terms of the sites that we use all the time, every single social media has a one-syllable word, meaning I am going to interact with your content in the most banal way possible. Every single piece of software has this nowadays. You like things, you poke things somehow, and praise them and toast them, and all other forms of verbs that kind of refer to making some generic positive goodness somewhere. Every single piece of social network has this verb meaning to indicate some manner of liking this person in general, liking this person in different ways, in the case of these four examples. But you get the kind of point that people do borrow things because they become conventions. It is not stealing. Everywhere uses at symbols to mean mention somebody, and hashtags to mean I'm talking about this general topic. So if I wanted to make a site, if I wanted to make a new e-commerce site selling puppies or some such, then I wouldn't call it Brisk Owls, because that would make no sense. You would call it Dave Mart, because you're borrowing this convention that Mart means e-commerce. I wouldn't refer to it as being you are now authenticated as this user, because everybody knows what logged in means. And I wouldn't suggest that I should productize something to my item cube, because again, people are like, what on earth are you talking about? You always add something to your cart. You have to take these advice, you have to take these conventions from other people in order to build your site and to make people feel as though your site is more usable. So this last one is one of the more interesting ones, I think. Watching your tone. It's appraisal season at the moment for us. We're writing feedback for everybody. It's really interesting how to write your feedback. So you can write some words, and they can mean something. And then you can write the same words, and they can mean something entirely different. Sam is certainly not a bad employee. They do complete all the tasks. They don't have to worry about them. Sam is certainly not a bad employee. They do complete all the tasks, and I don't have to worry about them. They are exactly the same words, but phrased slightly differently. They can suggest a genuine air of confidence and some kind of trying to be nice, but actually doing you in kind of talk. And by using exactly the same words, you can very, very quickly, give somebody the perception that you are talking about one thing rather than the other. Taking a brief sidestep into GCSE English now, if I can try and remember it. Connotation versus denotation. Connotation is what is the general feeling, what are the metaphors, what are the nice symbols that this image brings to you. Denotation is what does this word actually mean. If I go to a dictionary, what does the word say? What is a hard, concrete thing? If I ask you what is a house, then the denoter, the denotation of the word might be that it is a building. It provides warmth and shelter, and it is somewhere to store your possessions or loved ones. The connotation of the word is actually a lot more caring, a lot more fluffy than this. It's talking about the lovely warm fireplace. It's talking about the memory you had of your cat when you were 7, clawing your sister or something. It's talking about the warm and loving emotions that the word brings up. And you can control the denotation of the word. You can control the words that you use and what they denote to somebody, but you can't control the emotions that that person is going to draw from it. You can't control the general vibe that they're going to get from it. It's why, as an industry, we rely on email too much. Because as a written word, you don't actually give as much away behind your kind of underlying motivation for sending something. You don't get to give people the body language. You don't get to choose your tone of voice. you're giving that control to the person who's receiving the email. And that means that you are not in control of it. So you have to be very, very careful. You have to be hypersensitive to the underlying symbols and the underlying emotions that anybody could pick up from your words. You have to care about both sides. So how do we send across the right words? I don't know. I'm not an expert in your domain. Some of you, so Tom works at HP, I could not possibly talk about anything that HP might want to communicate to their users. So I can't talk about that. That's not what I'm here for. But I can kind of hopefully give you some advice about how to change your tone, how you can make your tone more appropriate on certain messages. And it's all about making sure that your response is appropriate. Now, this is kind of where we start getting back to the X factor, somehow. Because appropriate responses can be appropriate for one of two ways, for one of two things. It can be appropriate for the actual just situation. It can match the tone, or it can match the expectation that the user would have about an error message. But you can also shape somebody by making them think that a certain response has been appropriate to their case. So let's look at Sam Bailey. Sam Bailey won the X Factor in 2013, and this is a graph of her performance. So the grey lines do represent something, but let's just care about the blue line running through the middle. That is her vote proportional to the number of people who were left in the competition. So the higher it is, the better, and the lower it is, the worse. It will naturally converge to 100 as we go through the competition. This is Sam Bailey in a certain week of the competition. She is performing in front of an hourglass. The hourglass is running out of time. The colours are red and black, which typically represent despair and destruction. This is a week which she had her lowest downturn in the vote. Let's talk about this week. Sam Bailey is standing in the middle of a winner's podium and has a spotlight shining on her like the star that she was when she got the biggest upturn in her vote. We are setting the minds of the users to expect something. We are setting the minds of the users to expect that this is a performance that Sam Bailey is going to win with. And yet, that might come across as a bit tenuous. It is very, very profitable to bet on the X Factor once you know these tricks, by the way. Not that I'm suggesting that you do, because you're already to my profit. But you do get to kind of two axes to control. Is the user going to be annoyed at this? Is the user kind of actually expecting a response of a certain kind? Is there going to be a genuinely adverse reaction because of this? If not, then you can nudge a user slightly towards a certain perspective. Let's play a quiz. Everyone loves quizzes. What situation is this a reasonable response to? So there are 5 choices. Your backup was completed. Firefox crashed and lost your Flash game that you've been working so hard on. Kind of slightly more severe. All your data is irretrievably lost. Nothing's happening. And E, this is kind of catch bucket one, that this response is never appropriate regardless of what's going on. So let's start with, uh-oh, something went wrong. Which case is this kind of applicable to? Just shout out, please. B, yes. This is actually the Firefox crashing message. Something bad has gone wrong. I can actually slightly be a bit cheeky about this, and hopefully mean that you feel better about that the next time that something goes wrong. I discovered Keynote animations today, so this is going to be impressive. User failure. When is user failure an appropriate message? E, yes. Never blame your user for something. Your user is just going to get annoyed. It's like, well, you should have made your software handle my ridiculous input properly. Even if your user has just been hacking at your site and trying to hack into it, they will still somehow be annoyed when you tell them it's their fault. So never tell the user that they are doing something wrong. Error. Backup was successful. Yeah. These are all genuine error messages, by the way. Yeah, never use that. Just purely because a user doesn't need something like that. A user is getting conflicting messages. So what happens? So when is nothing happening in an appropriate response? To nothing happening. This sounds like a ridiculous thing, but if something has gone wrong on your application, or something has gone right in the status transition, tell your user about this. It's the only sensible thing to do. The user wants to the user wants to be presented with information that they can react to. And finally, success. It's left the easy one for last. It's the backup being completed. As I said, a user wants to know this information because they can actually do something with it. So, they're my 4 top tips. Remember why you're communicating. Remember the whole point of communicating is to transfer information to a user. The whole point of thinking about UX is because you can't control the channel that your user will be dealing with, and therefore you have to work within the confines of that channel. This talk is futile. Remember that you are going to go and make mistakes tomorrow, and the day after, and next week, and more. And therefore you should be getting feedback on any UI and UX decisions that you're making, because they're actually genuinely fundamentally important. Utilize conventions from other people. If you like something, then go and steal it. Go and use it. And when you are making something, go and look. If you're making an e-commerce platform, go and look at Amazon, because it's really important to use the conventions that they set in place. And watch your tone. Make sure that you are giving users appropriate error messages, appropriate amounts of error messages. To steal a quote from, I think it's on Vogue. Now it's time for a breakdown. We're going to take these 4 tips and we're going to see how we can apply them to modern applications. The first one is the source subject in software. Shouldn't be. Gender. Gender is hard. Gender is really, 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 really hard. Not just because we're building ourselves off of centuries of people doing bad things, but also because now we're recognizing that gender isn't as easy and as simple as we thought it might have been at one point. So if you have to care about gender, ask yourself, do I really need to care about it? Ask yourself again. Convince your board that you are getting data that can only be gotten by asking people about their gender. And if you are now still convinced that you have to ask people about their gender, just about do it, but remember certain things. Because the whole point about gender is that you are not an expert in it. I'm not an expert in it. There are very few people in the world who are. And so we have to be thinking about the people that will most be affected by asking about gender on applications. We are, as I said, we are not the experts here. So we have to defer to the people that know. If you're asking about gender on application forms, go and speak to somebody that might not identify as male or female and get them to look at your form and make sure that things are looking sensibly and answered. Leading questions. Leading questions can be used for good and evil. No. Using questions can be used for evil, or can be used for the evil cause that we support. Are you sure you want to do that? As a user, you are much more likely to say no to that question. You're like, oh, this is something that you might not ordinarily want. Is it really good? You know, maybe I could tempt you into doing this. But, you know, I think the default position is going to be no. Amazon's kind of pitch as to, look, just buy my shit. Sorry, buy my stuff. It's just kind of, you can make people, never put it up on the website, you can make people genuinely more likely to answer one way or the other by putting questions in. The negative examples are probably much less likely. Are you sure is obviously used when replacing Windows or navigating away from the site because people want to keep you there. But the positive questions are much more likely to be used. You can add this all for just $9.99. We are suggesting to our user, you've already bought some things. Would you like to add more to our package? They're more likely to say yes to this question. Half price for just 1 day more. We're giving the user information that says you can't use this offer again. They're much more likely to say yes. Click here to see more offers on similar goods. The exclamation mark suggests happiness. The action suggests, yes, you should go and do this now. And similar suggests, I've already been looking at these. Well, if I like these and I've just bought them, then maybe I will like these as well. You'll give me very good recommendations, helpful, Mr. Buxton. They're giving them helpful recommendations, but at the end of the day, they're giving them helpful recommendations that are also helpful for the bottom line of the website that has this on. I hate words, I really do. Paragraph, you can read it, or you can just take my précis, which is verbosity. Do any of you guys do peer review here? If you do you use things like Crucible or things like that? So Crucible has got a column on it. So you have rows which represent the different commits, the Git commits that you're reviewing. And there's a column that tells you the number of files that have changed in that commit. If I see a commit that has more than 20 files, my heart sinks. It genuinely does. It's like, oh, why didn't you break this up more? Why is this such a big change? And you really do feel demotivated by it. It just, maybe I'm affected by this more than other people, but it really ruins my day. So you have to think very carefully about when you're putting lots of words on a site, are you going to make users look at that and just feel a reaction? like this as to, oh, you're not expecting me to read all that, are you? So you've got to be very, very careful to avoid verbosity. Proofread. You've got to proofread everything. Every time you proofread, try and take something out. Very, very good tip. So every time you look through a past paragraph, you can probably get rid of words. And so that means if you're getting rid of words every time you proofread, you should proofread a lot, because that way you're going to make everything shorter. See if you can replace anything with images and icons. We discussed earlier that writing isn't always the right channel to do something. And there's a lot of pictures that just have things associated with them. So eBay they don't have the word my cart or my trolley on the page, they've just got a picture of a trolley. Because users know what that means now. Users are so familiar with that they don't need all the words necessary to do that. And make sure that you need to convey all the information. Sometimes the user doesn't need all the information you give to them. And maybe if they do, they can see more of that information on a text link, or somewhere that will make the error box slightly larger so they can copy the error message from the bottom. Advertisable changes, this is a fun one. We talked about the iceberg secret earlier. The users see 10% of what you do. So that means that you need to make sure that anything you do to the back 90%, you've given some way for the user to see. Because otherwise, they don't think you're doing anything. And that basically means that you are going to, in a really cynical level, it means you're out of a job. But on a more positive level, is actually suggesting that people do suggest that users like to be with sites that they can see genuine forward progress on. So if you're making forward progress on, say, the recommendation engine of Netflix, then yeah, that's great. The users might be getting suggestions that are leading to twice as many click-throughs or something, but they don't perceive that difference because it's all in the database. Plaster, new recommendation engine on it. Why not? What can you do? So a user then gets their attention drawn to it, they recognize that you're doing more work, and the overall goodwill of them using your site will be slightly higher. And then the last one is a call to arms. So give somebody something to do. Whenever you present writing or text to a user, don't let them just sit there and read it, because they will do nothing about that information. Users are sheep, not religion. Right? Users follow. Users go with the crowd. Users just do whatever you tell them to. Give users actions, and every step of the way, they will very, very likely do what you tell them to do. Yes, it's cynical. Yes, it is manipulative and evil. But who cares? That way users do what we want, and the software does what we want. This server, this thing is temporarily unavailable. As it stands, if we just had that first clause in this sentence, then a user would visit the site, and they wouldn't know when it would be back up, they wouldn't know anything like that. If we give them the action, please try again, they might refresh immediately. And more users will refresh immediately because of the please try again error message than they would have done otherwise. Please complete this short form. You can put a short form on a page, but a user will often be like, oh, do I have to? If you give them this nice, helpful call to action, they're much more likely to fill in the form, and importantly, much more likely to do it with goodwill. And we don't offer this product. Have you tried this site? We're giving the user, it's not just we are out of this product, it's also please go away and look somewhere else. Please go and do something to fulfill the need that you had on this site. It means that the user has more goodwill to your site to begin with, because you are actually helping them fulfill the request. But if you're running the site that you're linking them to, then that can be good for your bottom line as well. I'm aware I've waffled on for a long time. I didn't follow my own verbosity advice, so I'm going to wrap things up here. Does anyone have any questions? Sorry, hello.
Hi. So on the last slide you had to use the word please. How do you feel about using things like please and thank you in UX text? Yeah.
That's a very good question. I think it depends on the context. I think the nicer you need to be to your users, the more weasel words like that you should put on the page. So if something has gone wrong, or if you're asking the user to do something that they don't ordinarily want to do, you have to be as nice to them as possible. And in places like that, please is obviously very important. On error messages, sorry is very important, because you're not acknowledging fault for yourself. In other places, it can be a meaningless word. You have to kind of weigh up the cost of having that additional word in the text versus a good rule that you need the user to do in order to kind of jump through the hoops that your application needs them to do.
I think I might have a question. Can someone actually work too hard versus perhaps maybe working smarter? Or, I mean, how would you compare? There seems to be a lot of effort, like questioning everything and kind of maybe comparing your site with other sites. It's a different word. It sounds like it could be a lot of effort, a lot of hard work as opposed to just putting something out there.
Yep, that's definitely true. Cost-benefit analysis all the way. You need to ask yourself, how much will it cost me to do another round of UX reviews, and how much do I stand to gain from it? And that is the same, that is true with every single bit of software. You have to say, is it worth the effort? Sometimes it is worth the effort, and if you have got large amounts of users, I would suggest that it's, and you are a small site, I would suggest that it's relatively cheap to do that. I used to do support on a very large public-facing blog, and we got a lot of support calls, just being like, how do I use this piece of functionality? A slightly better direction would have helped them, and it would have avoided one whole support engineer for that exact reason, to just sit on the phone and say, no, just refresh, just refresh, let's control an F5, and we might be able to avoid that. But there is definitely the flip side, which is we've just paid somebody a lot of money for 2 whole days to change 3 words on the site that nobody will ever see, and that is clearly not worth. Again, I feel really bad whenever people ask me questions and I want to take a strong opinionated stance on them, and I say, no, just work it out, look at the case. You have to justify it to yourself and your team, and sometimes it's worth it, sometimes it's not. Any other questions?
Do you think that websites have made software more difficult to use? I'm thinking of things like, when I was doing my degree, one of the sort of principles of user interface design was affordance. So if something looks like a button, then you're invited to press it.
Yeah.
Many websites, buttons don't immediately stand out as being something you can use.
I think what websites have done is that they've made it easier to make software. And I think when it's easier to make software, people who are bad at making software can do it. And therefore, people don't realise, yes, buttons should look like buttons. There are lots of buttons. I could have Googled for some presentation and made you laugh that way, by the way. I did it the hard way. Yes, so I think it means, I think there is so much bad dross out there on the internet that you have to work harder to make something usable. You have to get over the user's initial kind of hurdle of, I don't know how to use the internet. And I think that because of that it is harder, but I don't think it had to have been.
I think a lot of your suggestions only allow you to find a local maxima, as it were, optimise locally. You know when you need to take a step back and look at the bigger picture. Does that make sense?
Yes. I think that's another talk. I think the point of what I was trying to suggest today is to look at the words on an individual basis, to look at paragraphs that you're writing on your page. I think there are, are there kind of cross-cutting concerns on the site?
No, I mean, a lot of these suggestions, it starts with something, and you're refining that. Not always the best approach. I find it difficult to know when, stop refining, take a step back, and take a completely different.
Yes. So to some extent, sorry Tom, Agile helps here. To some extent, kind of every 2 weeks, having to have a review ready and having to kind of look through something at the end of every iteration will give you that big picture affair. It will kind of build it into the process that you're looking back and doing this now. User acceptance testing is a great time to take a look at the bigger picture. You're kind of not saying, is this individual sentence correctly? Is this individual sentence formatted correctly? But is a user able to use our site in every single way that we'd like them to? And so times like this, where you're actually building it into the iteration process, can be good to worry about it on a larger scale.